Christmas. 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 There was only one thing in the world that Andy hated more than Christmas, and that was neon signs. They were big and ugly and bright and made his head hurt. In fact, a bit like Christmas. One day, Andy's worst nightmare happened. Right outside his bedroom window, a gigantic neon sign appeared. It spelt out a word, and the word was Christmas. To make matters worse, Andy only had one window because he only had one room. If that window was to open, the sign was in such close proximity that the glass almost hit it. Almost. He tried. The point of the huge and flashing and suddenly appearing sign wasn't obvious. As far as Andy could tell, it wasn't selling anything, instructing anyone, pointing to anything, or directing anyone anywhere. It wasn't even wishing anyone a Merry Christmas. It was just that one word, a declaration, a noun, as if that expressed it all. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Christmas. Christmas. Christmas, etc. The sign appeared in late October. Andy had turned his back for 2 seconds, and when he looked round again, there it was, obscuring his view of the drab city skyline he'd become miserably accustomed to. For the following 2 months, he stared at the big red word in horror, though not altogether in surprise. Truth be told, 2008 had been a bit of a shitter. The gigantic neon sign, you see, was only the latest in a line of a year chock full of unfortunate events. Such events included, but were not limited to, a painful throat infection, a painful divorce, a lost job, a lost friendship group, a lost sense of smell, getting kicked out of his old flat, getting kicked while he was down, and then another even more painful throat infection. And so by the time that the neon sign appeared, an already jobless, loveless, hopeless and sore-throated Andy had pretty much given up on 2008. There was no longer a bright side to his situation, least of all his new flat, which was a small damp box located at the top of a crumbly tower block in the most depressing suburb of the city. Had there been a bright side to his situation, it would have been the readily available free produce. But since Andy was allergic to mushrooms, it did not prove fortuitous that they grew from 3 of the 4 walls of his new home. Now, Andy had borne witness to the sign for so long that he knew it flashed on and off at exactly 1 second intervals. Christmas on, and Christmas off, and Christmas on, and Christmas off. Since he no longer had a job or a group of friends, Andy did maths calculations instead. He worked out that the sign flashed red 30 times a minute, 1,800 times an hour, and 6,400 times a day. This meant he'd seen it flash some 394,000 times. Of course, technically, he hadn't seen every single one of those times. There were occasions when he wasn't looking, like the 2 or 3 hours a night when he actually managed to get some sleep, or the occasional trip to the chemist for more sleeping pills. But even at those times, Andy had started seeing it. First, it appeared in his dreams, and then it began to appear on the inside of his eyelids. He saw it whenever he blinked, which was roughly once a second. This meant that even when he timed it so that he closed his eyes when the sign flashed on and opened them when it came off, he could still see it there, pressed against his eyeball. And if he timed the blinks wrong and they got out of sync, he'd see it permanently. On the sign on his eyeball, on the sign on his eyeball, on the sign eyeball, and so on. So what did Andy do? He didn't buy thicker curtains. He didn't write a strongly worded letter of complaint to the council. He didn't pull himself together and just try and get out more. Instead, he hatched a plan. The plan involved trying to beat the neon sign at its own game. It involved making a second sign. A sign so big and so splendid that it would put the first sign to shame. It would make the first sign blush, so to speak. But it wasn't easy. It took a lot of long, hard graft. It took 104 60-watt light bulbs. It also took 23 extension cables, 6 diesel-powered generators, 239 halogen tubes, 17 and a half rolls of tinfoil, 24 packs of fairy lights, 5 gold rings, 65 reels of tinsel, 512 ruby red baubles, and 6 crates of Kendal mint cake. The mint cake was for sustenance. By the time that Andy's sign was ready, it was March. The winter holidays were over, and blossoms sprouted on the trees. Last Boxing Day, the Christmas sign had disappeared. It was now replaced by a giant billboard of a fluffy Easter chick. The chick was wearing a top hat and was really very cute. Andy didn't notice any of these things, though, for 2 reasons. Firstly, because the neon sign was still imprinted on the inside of his eyelids, and secondly, because today was the day that the plan was going to come together. It was time for his creation to come alive. Carefully, he hung the sign out of his flat's only window, where it unravelled to cover some 400 square metres of the tower block's outside wall. Then he staggered across the room, sporting a wild mass of overgrown hair, a long, ragged beard, and curling 2-inch toenails. He hadn't slept for 40 days and 40 nights, and his clothes had become so torn that he was wrapped in nothing but a bedsheet. His hands and feet were bruised and cut with all the work, and great scabs had formed in the centre of his palms. Slowly, quietly cackling to himself, Andy dragged his feet towards the final electric generator. This was a heavy-duty super-silent diesel generator capable of producing up to 25,000 watts. It was time to switch on the sign. His fingers trembled as he prepared to display his message to the world. This will show them, he thought. And then he flicked on the switch. With a staggering total of 7,029,060 watts of electricity, the sign flashed a bright blood red. Andy's message was revealed to the world, a single word emblazoned in terrifyingly bright neon. And then it exploded. The 25-storey block of flats burst into flames. For the following 2 days, people all over the city watched it burn. It was reported in every newspaper and documented on every TV channel. Nobody could agree what the word had said just before it disappeared. But everybody had their own version about what the message meant. Nonetheless, the message didn't seem so important to those who saw it as the spectacle that happened afterwards. Eyewitnesses described the explosion as unforgettable, a miracle, the blazing red sight etched into their minds for eternity. They recounted the story of how they'd watched baubles, tinsel and fairy lights burst and glimmer and light up the sky, and how the cool white ash had fallen in delicate sprinkles onto the tips of their noses and into their outstretched hands. They all said it was like watching a huge, blazing Christmas tree. They all said it was like Christmas had come early.